Welcome back. We are back once again for the Wrestling with Story podcast. My name is Joshua Hale Fialkov. I am a writer and producer of television, animation, graphic novels, video games, a little bit of everything. And I love to talk about wrestling. And this is what I like to call What Happened, where we talk about what happened on tonight's episode of whatever wrestling show was on. And tonight was Dynamite, Blood and Guts. That's right, folks. July 24th, 2024, Blood and Guts. The Elite versus AEW, Team. Strike that, reverse it. We had a fantastic episode tonight. I got to say, this is I think 4 in a row that we've had fantastic episodes of AEW. I got to say, so writing, doing these videos and making these posts and just being involved in the general wrestling community online, it's been a very interesting ride these past few months. We actually just passed, just as a side note to pat myself on the back, we just passed 125,000 views on YouTube. We're at 1,400 followers on Instagram. So my channels have really been growing very, very rapidly. And I owe that a lot to all of you guys who are listening and following us along online. So thank you so much for that. But what I have noticed, over this time is that there is so much rage and animosity between AEW fans and WWE fans, or at least the really vocal ones anyways. And what's disheartening about that is that both the WWE and AEW are right now especially are making some really remarkable wrestling programs. And I think if you're excluding one out of some misplaced weird bitterness, you're missing out on some fantastic programming, just fantastic television. And that makes me sad for you. Don't make me sad for you. That's all I'm asking. Is that so much to ask? Because I think Monday Night Raw this week was fantastic. It was just a really, really great episode. There's the stuff that they're doing with Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley and Dominic Mysterio. It's very different. What they're doing is totally different than what they do on AEW and what they did tonight on AEW. But I find it just as entertaining and just as thrilling to watch. And I really get just so much pleasure from both of the shows. And that's why I do this. That's why I've chosen to do this with my time. Trust me, it is not to make money, because we are not. There is no money. That being said, if you would like to help us make money, there are lots of ways you can do that. One of the best ways you could do that is by sharing, subscribing, liking, reviewing, rating, all that stuff. Fantastically helpful. But that's beside the point. My point is that I do all this because I really do love wrestling, and the pleasure that I get from talking about it and sharing it with people has been a real gift and a real treat. And I just wish that everybody could kind of get over the tribalism part and just enjoy this thing and see how they're all just aspects of the same thing. They're all just different versions and different parts of it. Sorry, that's my dog walking around. It's my watch is buzzing at me as my dog walks around the backyard. In any event, let's get to the show so we don't have to just listen to me wax nostalgic, or I don't even think it's waxing nostalgic. It's waxing poetic, I think is probably what I meant to say. So the show opens with good old Alex Marvez walking around a parking lot at a hotel, because like all good television, that's where we should always start. And he's looking for a angry and rushed Will Ospreay, who comes to find that his tires have been slashed with a dagger that has been used in a murder. It has not been used in a murder. There's no murder. There's no murder to speak of. But of course, the implication is that MJF has slashed his tires. He then grabs Alex Marvez's keys, grabs Alex Marvez, and they drive off with a joke of Alex Marvez asks Will Ospreay, have you ever driven in the U.S. before? Which doesn't make a lot of sense, because then Will Ospreay says no. Which doesn't make a lot of sense, because Will Ospreay has his own car, so clearly he has driven in the U.S. before. But it's neither here nor there. We then cut into the arena where a group of cheerleaders in red, white, and blue are lined up, and they do a cheer for MJF. And what does that spell? MJF, because that is what it spells. And MJF comes out to his music and cuts a seething promo about how crappy the international title is, that it's a title for jabronis, essentially, that it's for these guys who all want to prove how over they are with the fans by working their butts off, and that is not how he rolls. So he has decided to rename the title, and I was excited because I thought we were going to get like a Triple B international title to match his old Triple B, the old Triple B world title that he had. Instead, what we got was a ultra tacky, hysterical American title instead of the international title. He trashed the international title, threw it in a conveniently placed trash can, and revealed not just the American title, but then he unfurled a giant U.S. flag with pictures of himself instead of stars. It was delightful. Just freaking delightful. There were streamers. There was a U.S. theme played, a delightful Mr. America-esque U.S. theme played. And then an angry Will Ospreay hit the ring. MJF bailed out. And Will Ospreay announced that he has talked to Tony Khan and Christopher Daniels. And they are going to have a rematch at All In. And MJF is shocked. I am shocked and outraged at this thing that is obviously happening. That was always the plan from the get-go. But it's funny because, again, and I talked about this a little bit on the Raw podcast. People have been complaining that like there wasn't enough story, and like this story between Ospreay and MJF isn't enough of a story. But like clearly what happened last week was just like the beginning of this feud between them, and it's going to go for the next several weeks leading into All In. And I would guess that match between the two of them is just going to be part 2 of a bigger. There's going to be a third part. Like I would bet that we're going to get part 3 down the road as well, because the two of them together is just too good to only do once or twice. So like they were so phenomenal together. It was such a classic match, and like this is going to be a long-term recurring theme between the two of them as they kind of come back and forth and constantly run up against each other. So I think we're in for a treat as we see the two of them going against each other. We came out of that and into a coin flip segment where we find the Elite standing over the wrecked body of Christopher Daniels, who has had the crap beaten out of him by the Young Bucks and Okada. They tell the referee that they're going to use their own coin, with the implication being that it's a marked coin, so that they win and they get the advantage. They also then tease that Hangman, who is the 5th member of their team, has not yet shown up. So that's setting up what is going to happen later in the episode, obviously. Very straightforward, but very fun. Just like we're getting there. We're moving, we're hustling along through our segments. We then get Chris Jericho, the Learning Tree versus Suzuki, Minoru Suzuki. This match, I don't know, man. I get it. It's a little bit of like old man theater as these two old men slap fest each other, and like they just slapped the living shit out of each other. Suzuki slapped Jericho so much he actually broke skin and was bleeding. Like Jericho was bleeding his little flabby chest out. And I say that with like, I mean, you can see I'm not made of meat over here. I'm made of lots of grade A pork. But like, not necessary. I could have lived without this match. It was fine. I think for what it was pretty good. But again, like, I'm just not into this feud. The match ended with the rest of the Learning Tree faction coming out, and then Suzuki gets saved by oh my God, not Hook, but Shibata. Sorry, Shibata comes out and saves Suzuki because Hook is still gone, and Joe is off filming a TV show, so we're not going to get Samoa Joe for a while. And I feel like I've talked about this at length, that just Jericho just doesn't do it for me right now. Like, the story doesn't, for me, I want Jericho. I feel like what they should be doing with Jericho is they should be using him as a manager more than anything. I think like that's where he's most valuable. I think he's great on the mic. I think the character works as a character on the mic. And what he's really pushing as a character is that he's a coward. And if you're playing a character who's a coward, then like shouldn't he be hiding? And the best way for a character like that to hide is to be a manager and to let his gang do all the work for him. So having him actually doing the matches and putting himself in these situations just doesn't seem to jibe. And that continues to be the main problem with this whole storyline, is that there's like a lack of reality in it. It doesn't quite make sense and doesn't quite feel realistic to me. It feels like a character. It feels like a put on thing. It's fourth wall breaking, but not in a good way for me. Come out of that to a backstage segment where Willow is getting interviewed about winning the CMLL women's title, and she gets interrupted by Statlander, who kicks the crap out of her and then tells her that she's going to get a. Yeah, so they set an eliminator match for next week where if she wins, then she gets a title shot. I don't quite understand why it's an eliminator match and why it's not just a match for the title. It's such a weird, specifically AEW thing to have these eliminator matches all the time. It just feels like such a weird intermediary step that we don't need. That being said, I love Willow to death, and I like Chris Statlander a lot, and so anything that gets them on TV, I'm happy about. Then we get a Bryan Danielson backstage segment that was previously taped, which, again, a little bit weird. But it's Danielson talking about how he's not too worried about whether he wins or loses. He's just excited to have his match. And then Jeff Jarrett comes out, and Jeff Jarrett plays Mr. Miyagi in this segment, where he essentially tells Bryan Danielson, like, win or lose, you have to do more. You must try. And tells him to get his shit together. And it's a really great segment. And the weirdest part is that Jeff Jarrett got a huge pop from the audience. Like, it's weird to see this sort of new Jeff Jarrett premiering and getting all this heat from everybody. I find it really interesting. It's really sort of fascinating to have. I was actually on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and one of the things that came up was that Danielson has done all these weird interviews. He did like a Sports Illustrated interview where they asked him about whether he wants to have the world title, and he was like, no, it's okay, I'm good. And they were like, the guys who I was on the podcast with were like, what a weird thing to do. Like, why is he blowing any excitement for him winning a world title? And I said on the interview, like, I don't know, it feels kind of like an angle. And sure enough, it's an angle. Like, they're playing it like an angle. Like, it's about him having to get over himself and actually want to win a title. So I do wonder if he's going to win the title, and then that also opens up Swerve to have a feud with Hangman, which they're also clearly working towards. So I think like there's a chance that Danielson wins the title at All In, because it also gives him something to do for his last year, last few months at least, as a active competitor. We come out of that into Britt Baker versus Hikaru Shida. And for being the first match that Britt Baker has had in months upon months upon months, it's a good match. It's a good, solid match. The two of them have wrestled a lot in the past, so they know each other really well. And like, they tease a heel turn for Shida, and she just can't get over it and can't do it. She can't betray her honor that way. And ultimately Britt, she gets the lockjaw. She gets her lockjaw locked in. And it's a good, solid match. Mercedes Moné comes out at the end and essentially tells Britt that she has long considered her match request for All In and has decided that no, she's not interested, but she has an alternative. And that alternative is for Britt Baker to get her ass kicked by Camille. And Camille, if you don't know, was the NWA World's Women's Champion last year, I think, and she signed to AEW last year, in the beginning of this year, I think. And everyone has been speculating about when is she going to show up and what is she going to do when she does show up. And apparently she is going to play the role of Chyna for Mercedes Moné. But that being said, great look, great threat. I like the idea that Mercedes is sort of building her own little elite, like her own little unit around her, that's also going to interface with the elite, which I think has always been the right thing to do. But yeah, good, solid segment. And again, like really happy to see Britt Baker hasn't really lost a step. She's going to be good. And I'm assuming they're going to give her a few matches and they're going to really build this feud and turn it into something. So that's good. That's good and exciting. And I also want to point out, like it sounds like kind of a damning it with faint praise. But if you take the blood and guts match out of this episode is actually really evenly split between the men and women. There was actually like 50% women's matches and women's interview segments to the men's, which is really pretty commendable on their part. Like they're really spending a lot of time and really building up the women's division in a good way. Up next, we had a quick backstage segment with Christian Cage and talking about how great it is to be the new Trios champion and pumping up how Nick Wayne is going to be in the Rampage Rumble match, which is going to be on Rampage, where they compete to get a number one contenders match for the world title, which is confusing because there's already a number one contender for the world title, and that is Bryan Danielson. But this is a second number one contender. And then Nick Wayne cuts a promo and then mouths off to Kip Sabian and is delightful because Nick Wayne is delightful. Then we get, okay, so now like in this world of confusing number one contenders, Pac comes out and has a squash match with the Boulder from the Iron Savages, which is sad for us because at no point does Pac get taken to Titty City, as Boulder is known for taking people to. But Pac is the number one contender for the international title, which number one doesn't exist anymore, and number two, Ospreay is now competing for at All In. So what's going on? And I guess that's going to be dealt with, I would hope, at some point. Weird. It's very weird. After that, we get a backstage segment with Team AEW, and we sort of like relay the fact that Darby Allin hates Swerve Strickland. We relay the fact that the Acclaimed are not really fans of anybody else. They're not really fans of either Swerve or Darby. And then Mark Briscoe comes out and he gives this like St. Crispin's Day speech as though it is a Shakespeare play, but with a redneck. And he is amazing, and he unites everybody, and they're all ready to go fight together. And it's a really great moment. Mark Briscoe's a treasure. I think considering all the tragedy and loss that guy has suffered over the past, year and a half, he's really made the most of it. And I think, I would wonder, because, it wasn't like they were being used before his brother passed away. So, I think like it's nice that it's nice that he's getting used now. And I think that his value has gone up, exponentially the more that he gets used. So that's good on Tony Khan for giving Mark a place that, again, like I can't see Mark Briscoe being in the WWE and succeeding because he's just so not them, right? Like the closest piece of talent I can think of is Otis. But even Otis is more polished and more together than Mark Briscoe is. Like Mark Briscoe is just like a tornado of insanity. And that's sort of what makes him so damn wonderful, and I just don't think there is an equivalent at either company, either TNA either. I don't think there's an equivalent to Mark Briscoe. And I think kind of the sky's the limit with him because of how damn weird he is. And he really just gives of himself in the ring. Like he's really remarkable in the ring. We came out of that to the reintroduction of Mariah May, the glamour Mariah May, and she had a squash match against local talent, Caitlin Alexis, I think was her name. And Mariah May came out with she had new ring gear, and she came out with a white shoe covered in blood, although not covered enough for my taste. It could have been much more bloody, would have been probably more effective. But she came out and she was her damn delightful self. Like that woman is just a beast in the ring. She's incredible to watch. She's so good at what she does. Just really, really remarkably talented. So damn good. Off of that match, she's in the ring, and then Toni Storm's music plays, and you realize like, it's Mariah screwing with the crowd. Except someone dressed in all black jumps in the ring, and that person is Toni Storm. And Toni goes to town on Mariah May. It takes a horde of referees to keep them apart. And Mariah and Toni Storm shrieks, "Do you want to die? Because I'm going to kill you." And it was magnificent. My God, it was magnificent. Came out of that into Blood and Guts. Blood and Guts was real good. I have some gripes. Don't get me wrong. I do have some gripes. But because the way War Games... Blood and Guts is War Games, for those who don't know. So that means that the teams come out one person at a time. There's always an advantage for one team. So there's usually 2 of one team versus 1 of another. So first, so in this case, it was Darby Allin came out first against first it was against Jack Perry, and then we got one of the Young Bucks, and then we added Mark Briscoe, and then another one of the Young Bucks, and so on and so forth. It's just that it takes so long for the actual match because the match can't start, quote unquote, until everybody's in the ring, and there's a delay. There's a timer between when everybody comes out. It's one of those things that, like a lot of the kind of Dusty Rhodes created theme matches, it has a lot of rules, but the rules don't necessarily facilitate storytelling. They facilitate obstacles, which sounds like the same thing, right? Like when you hear like, oh, but that creates all these obstacles, and those obstacles should be good things. They should be. I don't know that they are. I think it just sort of stretches things out a lot of the time. That being said, this one, once it got going, was pretty fabulous. Some of the highlights, there was Darby Allin came out with his skateboard that was covered in thumbtacks, and you sort of were waiting for him to use that thumbtack skateboard. When he finally did, delightful. When the Acclaimed came out, I think it was Anthony Bowens had a pair of scissors. So instead of his scissoring that he normally does, he used actual scissors, which is delightful. Okada came out with a Rainmaker Boulevard street sign, which he used to great effect. And then, of course, when it was time for Hangman to come out, there was no Hangman. Hangman never showed up. And then Swerve came out, and as Swerve was making his way to the ring as the last man, he gets tackled by Hangman, who handcuffs Swerve to the cage and goes after him. And as he is beating the living shit out of Swerve, the Young Bucks essentially order Hangman into the ring so that the match can start, which is confusing because technically Swerve has not been in the ring yet, so the match shouldn't be able to start either. But we're not going to talk about that, I guess. We're just going to let that slide. Hangman in the ring, he has essentially, you see him have beef with Okada, which is setting up, I guess there's a past history between the two of them from New Japan, but that's setting up, there might be something there for them to do later down the road, which is nice. And then everybody just goes to town on each other. Ultimately, Jeff Jarrett and Billy Gunn get involved on the outside, leading to Swerve getting himself free and actually tearing a hole in the cage to get inside the ring. And then things really go insane. There's an army of staple guns that the Elite start using on Swerve, and in sort of like a good tag back to that the blood match from Full Gear last year, they're all stapling him, and Swerve just does not care, and it actually powers him up, and he I gotta say, this might be the first time, and I feel like I've said this before. I feel like we talked about it a little bit during Forbidden Door, but this was one of the first times that it actually really felt like, oh, there he is, that guy's a champion, because he essentially was taking on the entire other team by himself. Like the whole rest of the AEW team was laid out, and he was just smacking the shit out of the Elite team all on his own, and just doing great spots with the staple gun, and just really, really outstanding. Weirdly, they went to commercial, they went to picture-in-picture, and while in picture-in-picture, something happens to Hangman and Swerve, and they get taken out, and then they're just gone from the rest of the match, which is a weird choice. And I'm assuming it was just a timing thing, and because the way that the way that they're getting cued by the referees, like they're not quite as clear on what's happening with the cameras. So like we lost that big chunk of the story, but they more than made up for it by having Jack Perry get the living snot kicked out of him with a bunch of really nasty chair shots. Darby did a coffin drop from the roof of the cage onto him. And then he took a chair shot to the face from Mark Briscoe that that guy, he needs to go get a concussion expert to look at him because I don't know how you get hit in the head with a chair that hard and not have a concussion. There was also a great Anthony Bowen got taken off the side of the cage through a stack of tables that was fantastic. And then ultimately, where the match fell short for me is the final moment is Darby douses Jack Perry in lighter fluid and then tells him he's going to light him on fire. And I believe it was Matt Jackson. I get them confused all the time. But Matt Jackson essentially pleads with Darby and tells Darby that he will give him a title shot at All In for the TNT title in exchange for not setting Jack Perry on fire. And Darby says, not only do you need to give me the title shot, but you need to say I quit. And that leads to the Jacksons saying I quit, and the match ends. Which feels anticlimactic because you just went through this giant whole thing. I think that the match itself was so good that final beat felt like slightly less anticlimactic because of it. I was actually just texting with a friend of mine who his theory is that there was supposed to be a bigger essentially like Jack Perry was supposed to get like covered in gasoline so that it was like a bigger like oh shit than what actually happened. Which was he just sort of got like squirted with gasoline. But it did have it felt a little anticlimactic at the end. That being said, the whole rest of the match was fire. And there was a lot of me shouting, especially when they went to commercial. Like I got to say, the going to commercial was very effective because you really were like, how can you possibly leave? Like where I want back now. And so it wasn't just the usual irritation of commercial breaks. It was actually a guttural, please God, give me back my show. I need the show. I need the show. I need the show. Which is a really neat trick, a really, really effective, neat trick. And that was AEW Dynamite and Blood and Guts. Really fantastic. A really, really enjoyable, one of the best episodes of Dynamite. Again, in a run of great episodes, this one might have been the best. Might have really been the most enjoyable. Nothing quite reached the same level of that Will Ospreay MJF match, but that being said, I think consistent overall, just every match was really solid. Every match moved story forward. And our march towards All In continues to be just fantastic. And I can't wait to see what happens next. I really hope you guys are watching and enjoying it. If you have thoughts that you want to share with me, anything you want to bring up or want me to talk about, you can always email me at josh@wrestlingwithstory.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at instagram.com/wrestlingwithstory. Or, of course, you can follow, if you're listening to this as an audio version, you can watch the video version, or you can watch any of the copious videos that I release on a daily basis over on YouTube at Wrestling with Story. And you can follow me on Twitter at Josh Fialkov. I am not going to be around the rest of the week because I am going to San Diego Comic-Con. And there's all kinds of cool wrestling content down there at San Diego Comic-Con, so I will be putting up videos on Instagram and on YouTube. So I do suggest you give me a follow and keep an eye out for that stuff. And I have a giant announcement of a huge book that I'm working on that's going to get announced on Saturday via Legendary Comics. And I'm super excited for that. That's going to get announced, and I will be sure to post about that. And I'll even try and maybe make at least a live. I'll probably do a live, some kind of live. I just keep saying the word live over and over. I'll try and go live either on Instagram or maybe on Twitter or both or some version thereof to try and talk about it and let people know what's happening once it gets announced. So do me a favor, follow me all those places. Thank you for supporting us. If you want to support us, you can, of course, pick up some of our kick-ass merch, which you can get by going to my website, which I will link in the show notes, or you can go to thefialkov.com and click on store. We have awesome t-shirts. We have mugs. We have coffee tumblers. We have other stuff like that. Everything you buy, everything you support is a way to tell us that you enjoy what we do and you want to say do more. Another great way, of course, is to rate, rank, support, review, share, tell your friends, subscribe, do all that stuff that you know because you listen to other podcasts and they tell you what to do. We'll be back next week for Monday Night Raw on Monday for our live stream on YouTube and on Twitch. We're going to have on the podcast next week, we're going to actually have comic book impresario Steve Orlando is going to be joining me to talk about how wrestling impacts his writing and his creative process, talk about some of his favorite wrestling matches and wrestling stories, and talk about what it's like writing characters like Batman and Wonder Woman, and he has done all kinds of super cool stuff for Marvel and for DC, and he's writing, oh God, what's he writing right now? I don't have his stuff. I don't have his credits in front of me, but he's writing. I think they're announcing something really big at Comic-Con this weekend. So we will hopefully have all of those announcements and all that exciting stuff when we come back next week with him. So thank you so much for listening. If you haven't yet, please hit subscribe to follow along, and we will see you next week. Thank you for listening to Wrestling with Story podcast. My name is Joshua Hale Fialkov, and again, wrestling forever.